Amazon rainforests have discovered an extensive network of cities dating back over 2,000 years. The highly structured pre-Hispanic settlements have been excavated in the Upano Valley.
Before the first stones of Egypt's pyramids were stacked, a thriving city was already growing under the Amazon canopy. It had roads, neighborhoods, and farmland, all buried and forgotten for thousands of years. Now, using laser scans and soil testing, scientists have revealed a lost world that changes everything we thought we knew about the rainforest.
I like having X-ray vision and seeing beneath the canopy without having to touch a single leaf. We are starting to get information from all kinds of places where we knew absolutely nothing.
The lost Amazon city hidden beneath the jungle. On the Amazon side of Ecuador's Andes lies a place called the Upano Valley, a long green stretch watched over by the Sangay volcano and the nearby town of Macas. Deep inside this valley, just about 6 miles from a small forest lake known as Lake Cormoran, scientists made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the region. This part of Ecuador isn't flat like a plain or open like farmland. It's where the Andes begin to drop into the Amazon, steep, uneven land that doesn't seem ideal for city building. Yet under that forest, they found what can only be described as a planned network of ancient settlements, complete with straight streets, repeating blocks, and linked centers. Back in the late 1970s, a local priest working near the base of the Sangay volcano noticed strange, evenly shaped hills that didn't look natural. He pointed them out to another priest, an archaeologist named Pedro Porras, who decided to take a closer look. Porras cut small test trenches into the slopes and quickly realized what he was seeing. These weren't hills at all. They were man-made mounds, built with flat tops and sharp edges. He called the area the Sangay Mound Complex and published short reports that proved, for the first time, that these shapes were artificial. The work was basic by modern standards, but it put the site on the archaeological map and sparked serious fieldwork in the years to come. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, teams from Ecuador and France returned to the same valley and began studying it in full detail. A joint effort led by archaeologists Ernesto Salazar and Stephen Rostain walked the ridges one by one. They mapped the clusters of mounds and opened larger, cleaner excavation pits. In their notes, they described straight lines carved into the ground that held their direction for surprising distances, lines that looked more like engineered roads than worn footpaths. Between the mound groups, they found open plazas, and the pattern kept repeating from hill to hill. That was when the idea of a planned landscape began to form. The early field teams measured hundreds of individual platforms by hand. Their notes described long, rectangular shapes anywhere from about 33 feet to more than 320 feet long, roughly 26 to 66 feet wide, and 7 to 26 feet tall. Some had smaller steps attached to one end, which Porras nicknamed the jaguar paw shape. Others were bent into L, T, or U formations that framed the plazas between them. Those early digs also uncovered the small, unmistakable traces of everyday life. Pieces of broken pottery, called potsherds, appeared inside the fill of the mounds and in the soil layers around them. Their color, texture, and decoration matched known ceramic styles used by local cultures in that part of Ecuador. Charcoal fragments turned up in the same layers. Together, these finds showed that the platforms were built by people and used over time, not formed by natural erosion or landslides. Decades later, new technology would finally reveal just how vast that hidden world really was. Researchers flew over the area using a laser mapping system called LiDAR. It works by sending laser pulses through the tree canopy and creating a 3D image of the ground below. What they saw shocked them. Beneath what looked like an endless jungle was an entire grid-like layout carved into the earth. The survey covered around 232 square miles, but scientists focused their analysis on about 116 square miles in the middle of that zone. Within that area, they counted roughly 6,000 raised earthen platforms. Across hills and valleys, the same layout repeats again and again. There are long rows of rectangular platforms, each one grouped neatly together. Between them lie open spaces, like courtyards or plazas, breaking up the blocks in an even rhythm. These shapes aren't random bumps caused by nature. They're deliberate, straight-edged constructions placed side by side. Cutting through these platform clusters are long, straight corridors. You could call them roads because that's exactly what they look like. Some are about 33 feet wide, roughly the width of a modern two-lane street, and they run for 6 to 12 miles without curving. In some areas, the roads get even wider, up to about 43 feet across. Even when the land rises or dips, the roads keep their straight path. They don't bend around obstacles, they go right over them, like the builders were determined to stay on course. That single choice, to build straight instead of easy, proves these weren't casual tracks between villages. This was an engineered network connecting entire communities across the valley. When the LiDAR data is viewed as a whole, it's clear how those straight roads link everything together. At least 15 separate centers appear across the mapped zone, all connected by these roads. Some of the major places marked on maps include Sangay, Quilamope, Conguins, Copueno, and Nijamanch. The 5 biggest centers sit at the ends of the longest roads, while the smaller ones line those routes like rest stops between cities. They weren't packed close like a modern downtown, but spread out over miles, a connected chain of settlements that together formed one large system. Based on the size of the network and the number of centers, researchers believe the valley supported at least 10,000 people. Finding it was one thing, proving it had once been alive with people was another. That part took science, patience, and a few surprising tests. The tests that proved the city was real. After the flights, field teams hit the ground to see what was really there. They walked across ridges and slopes, tracing the same lines seen from the air. They measured the edges, logged how steep the slopes were, and dug small test pits where needed. Every spot they checked confirmed the same thing. Those flat, raised areas were not natural features. They were built from packed earth, and the long, straight cuts that crossed them weren't streams or gullies. They were man-made. Field crews also collected bits of charcoal and tiny plant remains sealed within undisturbed soil layers. These samples could be dated, giving scientists a direct way to turn shapes on a map into a real timeline. To build that timeline, researchers used radiocarbon dating, a tool that measures how much of a special type of carbon remains in once living material, like burned wood. Over time, that carbon slowly disappears. The less of it that's left, the older the sample is. Across the Upano Valley project, nearly 70 radiocarbon dates were obtained from secure layers that clearly belong to the mounds and roads. Together, those dates form the backbone of everything known about when the system was built, used, and abandoned. The results set 3 clear milestones. First, people were already living in the valley by the first millennium before the Common Era. Second, construction of the earthworks began not long after. And third, the system remained in use into the early centuries of the Common Era. In plain terms, the story starts several hundred years before Year Zero, continues through the rise of the mound and road network, and carries on for centuries after. The same data also point to when things began to slow down. Rather than ending in one sharp moment, activity across the valley gradually declined between the 3rd and 6th centuries of the Common Era. After that decline, the land wasn't empty forever. Centuries later, another group known to archaeologists as the Huapula returned to some of the old sites. Their activity, dated between about 800 and 1200 of the Common Era, shows up in new layers and artifacts left on top of older mounds. They didn't rebuild the entire system, but they reused parts of it, leaving behind a clear second chapter in the valley's story. The second source of evidence comes from Lake Cormorant. In 2017, scientists drilled a core of lake mud nearly 20 feet long from its center. Each layer of that core represents a different moment in time, the newest at the top, the oldest at the bottom. Using 8 radiocarbon samples, researchers built a timeline stretching back more than 2,500 years. Inside that core were countless tiny plant traces. The two most useful are pollen, the fine dust plants released to reproduce, and phytoliths, small glassy particles that form inside leaves and stems. Both get washed from the land into the lake, settling on the bottom and locking in a record of what was growing nearby. When scientists find corn pollen, or corn phytoliths, from the plant Zea mays, it's direct proof that people were growing corn on land that drains into that lake. Because corn pollen is heavy and doesn't travel far in the air, it can only come from local fields, not from distant farms. In the Cormoran record, corn appears again and again between about 670 years before the Common Era and around 520 of the Common Era. Nearly 12 centuries of steady farming. During much of that same window, the mud also holds more charcoal than before, showing that people were burning land regularly, probably to clear fields. Pollen from alder trees also increases sharply. Alder is a fast-growing species that people often plant for wood or soil improvement. When corn, charcoal, and alder rise together, it points strongly to human land use, clearing, planting, and managing fields. The lake also records the slowdown. Between roughly 200 and 550 CE, the traces of farming and burning fade, while forest pollen returns. The researchers looked carefully for a thick layer of volcanic ash that could match a sudden eruption, but found none at the key depth. The only ash band they discovered came from the late 1300s, long after the decline. The simplest explanation is that the valley's use tapered off gradually over centuries, rather than stopping after one disaster. That detail matters because older theories claimed a huge eruption from the nearby Sangay volcano wiped everything out in one blow. This doesn't mean volcanoes played no role. It just means there's no clear sign in this lake of a single eruption causing the abandonment. Part of the reason lies in geography. Lake Cormoran sits high in the mountains, about 5,740 feet above sea level, and roughly 10 miles upwind of Sangay. Winds here blow mostly from the east, which carries most ash away from the lake instead of into it. That wind pattern helps explain why no thick ash blanket formed in its sediments at the time of decline. The same lake record continues far beyond the ancient period. After about 1500 CE, corn pollen reappears, forest cover changes again, and a canopy palm becomes more common. These later shifts match known historic land use, showing that people returned to the area in later centuries, and that the forest went through several rounds of clearing and regrowth. After dating the soil and reading the lake's history, scientists turned to the next mystery: how this place worked day to day. Life inside the lost Amazon city. Think of each cluster as a small neighborhood. The platforms are where most of the work happens, where people cook, make things, store supplies, and in many cases, live. The open square beside them is shared space. It's where people gather, prepare food together, dry their crops, or hold community events. Because the same setup appears again and again, the whole valley looks like a chain of connected neighborhoods joined by long, straight roads. The layout also solves one of the biggest problems in a rainforest: standing water. In a place where rain is constant, drainage is everything. Here, small ditches and shallow terraces guide water away from paths and keep the platform edges from turning to mud. When it rains hard, runoff follows these planned channels instead of cutting through the middle of each block. Food isn't far away. Gardens and small farm plots sit right beside these clusters or just a short walk away. This close mix of homes and crops is what scientists call garden urbanism. The crops are the ones typical for this part of the Amazon: corn, beans, manioc, and sweet potato. With fields nearby, people can check their plants daily, scare off animals, and harvest quickly. The farms are small and spread out instead of one big field. That's smart in a place where sunlight, soil, and moisture can change within a few steps. Higher patches get corn and beans. Slightly lower, better drained spots grow manioc. Lighter soils are good for sweet potatoes. The straight roads help the food system too. A clear route lets people carry baskets between the gardens, squares, and platforms without weaving through thick brush. Sharing tools, passing produce, or moving supplies is simple when everything follows a straight line. The main corridors link one cluster to another, and side paths branch down toward the water where people wash, soak fiber, or clean fish. Every path has a reason. Nothing in the plan is random. The plan also helps with air and light. The open squares act like little courtyards, letting in sunlight for drying food or growing young plants near the edges. The straight corridors allow air to move through after rain, drying the ground quickly and preventing the area from staying damp. It's a simple but effective solution to the challenges of living in a rainforest. Building and maintaining these raised platforms and straight paths took steady teamwork. To make a flat mound, people had to dig soil, carry it in baskets, dump it in layers, and pack it down tight. Edges had to be trimmed and kept square. Paths needed to be cleared and re-cleared after storms. Drains had to be reopened each season. That kind of upkeep means coordination and shared labor. Families caring for their own platforms, neighbors cleaning the squares, and larger groups maintaining the main roads. What the LiDAR map shows today is the long-term result of that constant effort. But the story doesn't stop in Ecuador. Across the Amazon, other cities were doing the same thing in their own way. The other lost cities, hidden across the Amazon. The city in Ecuador is just one part of a much larger picture. Across the Amazon, people faced the same basic challenges: how to live together, how to move around, and how to manage water. And they came up with different solutions depending on where they lived. 3 examples make this clear. 1 in Bolivia and 2 in Brazil. Each shows that big, organized settlements were not rare in the ancient Amazon. They simply took different shapes depending on the land, the rain, and the needs of the people who built them. Let's start in Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos, a wide region of grassy plains mixed with pockets of forest. It floods during part of the year and dries out during another. Here, the Casarabe culture built large centers that stood high above the floodplain and connected them with raised roads and canals. 2 of the main hubs are well known, Landivar and Cotoca. Landivar covers about 778 acres, a little over 1.2 square miles. Cotoca is smaller, about 363 acres, roughly half a square mile. These weren't small hamlets or scattered villages. They were major centers sitting within a larger network that included 4 levels of settlement size, from tiny sites to these urban hubs. The landscape between the centers was far from empty. Airborne mapping revealed straight raised roads, called causeways, linking sites over long distances. Canals and reservoirs were also built into the terrain. When researchers traced all the visible lines, they counted roughly 595 miles of canals and causeways across the entire culture area. That number alone shows how big the project was and how carefully the people engineered their landscape. One of the main canals feeding Cotoca runs for about 4.5 miles. Inside the larger centers, you can still see tall earthen platforms and cone-shaped mounds that rise as high as 65 feet. The whole system stretches over roughly 1,737 square miles of known distribution. Now move east to Brazil's Upper Xingu. This is a forested region, and its design is different from Bolivia's savanna system. After about the 1300s, people in this part of the Amazon built clusters of settlements tied together by wide, straight roads, open plazas, and ditches that marked boundaries or enclosures. Archaeologist Michael Heckenberger, working closely with indigenous leaders and researchers, spent years mapping these patterns. What they found were constellations of villages, many small sites linked to larger ones in a repeating structure. The layout shows clear organization on 2 levels: rules that shape life within a single village and rules that organize how villages connect across the wider landscape. Stand in one of the Upper Xingu plazas, and the plan is easy to understand. From the central open space, broad roads stretch outward like spokes on a wheel. Around the edges, earthen banks and ditches form clean, curved lines. These aren't decorative features. They make movement predictable and keep water from pooling during heavy rains. They also give each settlement a familiar look, so anyone arriving knows where to walk and where to meet. Researchers describe this as a low-density urban pattern, spread out over the landscape but still highly organized. It matches indigenous oral histories from the region, which describe connected clusters of villages ruled by common traditions. The design forms what archaeologists call galactic clusters, many settlements orbiting around larger centers. The distances between the Xingu villages feel personal and practical, far enough apart to leave space for gardens and forest, but close enough for people to visit within a day. The roads that connect them are straight and broad, not narrow trails twisting through the undergrowth. Some ditches likely served as defenses, others simply marked boundaries. Now move farther west to another part of Brazil in Acre State. Here lies a third kind of built landscape, the Acre geoglyphs. These aren't cities in the same way as the Kasarabi or Xingu systems, but they show enormous organized labor and land planning. Imagine giant geometric figures, squares, circles, and long connecting lines, carved into the soil with deep ditches and raised banks. More than 450 of these earthworks are known across about 5,000 square miles of acre. Soil samples and plant remains show that people were digging and maintaining these sites over 2,000 years ago. Fire and ash layers in the surrounding soil trace even older cycles of human use, reaching back thousands of years. Why carve such huge shapes if people didn't live there all year? The reasons likely differ from site to site, but the meaning is clear: planning and control over space. The ditches are even, the shapes repeat, and some are connected by straight roads. This wasn't random clearing or small farm fencing. It was large-scale engineering that required coordination and shared rules. More recent work has also found plaza-style villages and straight road networks in parts of southwestern Amazonia that echo the same logic. These ancient cities have big implications for the present. First, conservation must include the hidden past. Many of these sites are buried under a living forest. A single illegal road, a new cattle pasture, or an unplanned development can slice through ditches, mounds, or canals in days, erasing stories that took centuries to build. Experts across Brazil and neighboring countries warn that legal protection remains thin. Even a World Heritage label simply raises awareness. It doesn't stop bulldozers. Real protection depends on national and local laws, and on people enforcing them in the field. That's why archaeologists and indigenous leaders are calling for faster mapping and stronger protections before more sites disappear. Second, mapping tools can help stop damage before it starts. Once a site's boundaries are mapped airborne laser, it can be marked on planning maps so new roads, pipelines, or clearings avoid it. Third, the scientific community is pushing for a broader model of forest protection, one that treats archaeology as essential, not optional. The reasoning is simple. The Amazon we see today was shaped by people for thousands of years. Protecting only wild nature leaves out the human story that made it what it is. Many researchers now argue that urgent action is needed, especially along frontiers where deforestation advances mile by mile each year. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.